Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Salted Hash. I'm your host, Steve Reagan. Today, I'm joined by Barracuda's Usuf Sedan, and we're going to be talking about some phishing, some email scams, and a couple of trends that you might want to know about. Stay with us, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Usuf, how are you? Friend of the show.
Thank you. Good. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to have you back on. Thanks for coming to hang out with us. So, I don't want to be the spoiler, but y'all have been busy lately. Quite a bit busy. So, tell me about this stat I'm reading here from one of your communications people. It says on May 1st, you've blocked over 3.2 million phishing emails. What's going on with that? What are you doing?
Yeah, well, yeah. So, I mean, one of the interesting things about phishing, it's it's kind of like the weather, right? So you can have, sometimes it's all nice and sunny, and just a little bit of kind of background noise, and then sometimes you just get really kind of significant peaks in activity. Sometimes those peaks are related to certain events, maybe holidays or something like that. But in other times, I mean, it's just an attack, probably like a hacker group. That suddenly, decided to send out a certain campaign, and so yeah, we've generally been very busy in the last couple of months. We've just been seeing a pretty big uptick in phishing attacks, both in terms of the number, just the raw numbers that we're seeing. We're seeing just mass campaigns. So in the last 2 months, I think we've seen over 3 million different attacks, and that's within that's thousands of different unique phishing attempts. So the phishing world is kind of separated. There's the kind of mass phishing, and where the same template is used many times, and they're trying just to get a lot of folks to fall for it. And then there's the more targeted stuff, where they're typically after more a more higher profile kind of targets.
So lately here it makes perfect sense. Here with my own research lately, I've been noticing an uptick in kits that are based on services and not just well-known brands. Like I found a Zoom phishing kit the other day that I thought was really interesting, that Zoom's now on their radar to where they want to get credentials for that. But you came across a Wells Fargo, Netflix, Citibank. You've seen an uptick in those recently. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so one thing that's really important to remember is that attackers, people reuse passwords, right?
Yep.
So so a lot of people use the same password that they do for Netflix, that they do for their corporate email system, or maybe their payroll system, right? And so attackers really don't care, right? Like once they have a password of someone, they can wreak havoc, even if the system doesn't necessarily seem that dangerous or that sensitive. So they're basically trying to get in any way they can. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. Like we've seen in most of our customers are obviously kind of corporate, or corporate organizations, right? They're not consumers, but we've seen a really big uptick, for example, with a lot of these consumer services like Netflix, where they're trying to grab the Netflix password and then reuse it to get into the corporate network. So yeah, that was a really interesting one. We've also seen like a lot of these internationally. So I think one of the examples we sent your way was Netflix, but it was actually in Spanish, I believe. So we've seen
Spanish Netflix.
So the attackers are pretty savvy, right? They're kind of, I think, tracking the expansion of some of these services internationally. Perhaps Netflix was introduced to a few new countries, and with the enthusiasm about it, they're kind of following it and trying to harvest credentials.
Yep. So it wasn't the kit that you guys sent me over, but there was another Netflix kit I came across that was geolocated. This one was French, and what I thought was really interesting was I'm not entirely certain if Netflix had like a dominant French presence. But what was interesting was when you looked at the back end of the code, if your IP or your location didn't match France, it would direct you to a fake 404 or a 302 to redirect you over to Google. You wouldn't even get to see the kit. They're literally just wanting one locale. It's interesting to see how they're developing their security mechanisms. Are you seeing any tricks similar to that, or are you seeing anything that stands out as really cool in your mind? I mean, what are you seeing?
Yeah, no. So I mean, by the way, let me zoom. Yeah, so we've definitely seen that, and I think the thing that they're trying to do there, right, is they know that most, or not most, but many, like for example, email security vendors, or let's say Office 365 and Gmail, obviously sit in the U.S. and some of the techniques that companies have developed are based on actually going in, kind of. And actually looking at the site itself and trying to analyze it. So if they can put a 404 page, a lot of these
Yep.
filters won't cache the email. So and they're and they know that someone who's not French will probably not click on a French email. So yeah, I mean it's not honestly it's not like rocket science, right? I mean it's not that hard to do something like that. But they know So another really interesting one we've seen, which is slightly related, is text manipulation has been around for a very long time in the world of spam and phishing. So now we're seeing people entering, the attackers kind of entering, zero font text in email. That's something that we're seeing, or they're playing around with various alphabets. So the same word will have different. We'll have the R in Cyrillic.
Yep.
So that's another place that they're really focused on. By the way, another similar type of deception is just instead of sending like spam emails or phishing emails with text, they'll have it in images. And again, since most filters rely on analyzing the actual text, they don't actually go and do OCR or something like that on the image. They'll also fail. So yeah, so there's a lot. So it's all of these, in my opinion, fall in the category of like social engineering. They're not, these are not techniques that are like about creating a very, it's like a super complex 0-day exploit in Windows that, or something like that. It's more about kind of fooling the filters and fooling the humans looking at the email.
Nice. All right, stop right there. Your video froze for a second, so we're just gonna let you. No, we're gonna let the. No. We got everything you just said was recorded. We're fine there.
Okay.
We're gonna wait for the video. Yeah. All right. Well, Chris says keep going, so we're gonna keep going. So, going back to an interesting thing I saw in one of the kits. I'm curious, when it comes to the htaccess files, a lot of these kits include for security reasons, like if your IP falls within a certain range, block it and everything like that. Where are they getting these address ranges? Are they logging their own stuff, or are they just coming against it on the fly, like there's a known pool of addresses they're blocking?
Yeah, that's a good question. I suspect, so first of all, like some of this information is available online. Like the attackers actually do share information. Also, don't forget, I mean, these guys have, they run. So we suspect, for example, like in spam syndicates, right? The same organization is going to run multiple campaigns and is almost going to build a kind of a platform for distributing spam. So we know, we the same thing is true with phishing, right? So they've worked with the major vendors that do security, with the major email service providers. They understand how these systems work. They understand what IPs they might use to look up, links. And then sometimes they might distribute that information amongst themselves. So these are fairly experienced and seasoned attackers, right? Like a lot of these attacks are clearly crafted with the understanding of how email security systems work. And to be honest with you, I'm the first to also criticize my brethren in the security industry. A lot of the techniques that people use are still very naive. They're based on IP reputation. They are based on very simple regexes and text analysis and blacklists, right? So it's no wonder that these techniques work.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So touch base, just one last thing before we have to go. There's been an interesting police case here lately. I understand you're familiar with it. Department of Justice just nabbed scores of scammers involved in fraud, millions of dollars worth of stuff. Give me a breakdown on that. What's your take on that whole arrest situation over at DOJ?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I've actually personally been working on BEC. That's kind of
that's your thing.
That's my thing, and that's been kind of something that at Barracuda we've really dedicated a lot of efforts into. So, yeah, so I mean, I think that, what happens, right, is the end goal of most of these BEC campaigns is a wire transfer at the end.
Yep.
Sometimes they try to steal sensitive information, like social security numbers or medical information. But generally, in analysis we did, 99% of BEC attacks, the end goal is a wire transfer. And so when there is a wire transfer, at some point, right, we as a security company kind of cannot, kind of our responsibility ends, and kind of DOJ and the banks kind of begin. So I know that a lot of our customers, a lot of folks that came to us because of BEC problems had in the past reported these problems to DOJ, and DOJ did launch investigations.
Yep.
I know that a lot of these cases have been very tricky because especially if the account at the end is like sitting in China or Russia or kind of a quote unquote non-coop or less cooperative country, it's very hard to retrieve the money. But in this case, it seems like there was a presence in Nigeria, but there was also a presence in the U.S. And so perhaps that's kind of the way they were able to catch this ring. I will say, I looked at the numbers that were published, right? So I think they were able to. This ring was responsible for several millions of dollars.
Yeah, 2.4 million was seized, and they disrupted or recovered 14 million in fraudulent wire transfers.
Yeah, so I mean that's great, and that is a lot of money, but that is actually, that is a drop in the bucket, right? So that is, if the FBI published numbers up to 2016, it was $5 billion in mistaken wire transfer and fraudulent wire transfers. So I mean that's like less than 1%, right? Way less than 1%, right? So I mean I think this shows the types, and think about it, like this operation, these guys were able to extract several $1 million. They had dozens of people working in an international syndicate. So just imagine how many other people of that like $5 billion economy. There's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of criminals around the world working on this. So I think it's great that they did it, but I think we need to. I think this is just a kind of an alarm.
It's the tip of the iceberg.
And it shows you how widespread this is. Yeah. So we need to all be very vigilant about BEC. Can I just say one more thing, Steve? Just a really interesting attack that we've seen. So, the cutting edge now of BEC is BEC plus account takeover. And that's actually the attack that I'm personally most worried about. Because I think, there are pretty decent solutions for BEC now, but what we've seen is attackers actually take over. They steal the credentials of an internal employee, and then they use the actual account of that employee to send an email like to the CFO. So the CFO is getting an email, hey, wire transfer money from the actual CEO's email from within the corporate network, right? And that attack, we've started seeing that, and I mean that is extremely extremely dangerous and hard to catch. We're working on it. And we have some solutions in place to help with ATO, but I think beyond that, I think companies just need to have a really high awareness to wire transfers. They need to do training. They need to set up safeguards. Anytime a wire transfer comes in, a request for a wire transfer, companies need to be really, really vigilant, even if it's coming from the phone of the CEO or from the email of the CEO. It's super dangerous.
Well, see, that's the frustrating part about all that. When you see these BEC scams, take off, it's because they're actually playing along with the normal workflow of the business. So if you get an email from the CFO that says, "Hey, wire transfer to this account $5 million," and you do it, that's because you normally would get an email typically during your business day to transfer money. That should never happen. When you're dealing with this kind of high value sum, it should be a face-to-face meeting. Here's the account I need you to transfer to. We need to get this done today. Then you do it. I mean, it takes 2 seconds to pick up the phone or to meet somebody face-to-face to confirm this versus do it over email. I mean, this is how they got away with getting all the W-2 records and everything during tax season. All they would do is email the company and say, hey, I need all your tax records. Somebody gave it to them. I mean, it's just a normal business thing that they're just inserting themselves into. They're not even disrupting it. This is typically how they work, so they just go right in. Going back to your account takeover thing real quick, it sounds like they're advancing on what they were doing last summer. There was a group in Nigeria that was taking over accounts and then it's pushing the emails from there. So is this an advanced version of that, or are they just more coordinated this time, sticking with high-level targets?
Yeah, no, I think it is advancing, right? So account takeover is also something that we've been really focused on and have researched quite a bit. So, I think in the early days of account takeover, typically they would just harvest credentials, and then use the accounts that were taken over to launch additional phishing campaigns. So, for example, like I take over, an account of, whatever, like a university, okay, and then I'd use that university's email to send thousands of emails to other, higher value targets trying to phish them, for example. And those emails would get through because the university would have a very high reputation, right? My email would be trusted by, for example, Microsoft. Now, what we've seen is, they're now doing more sophisticated campaigns, right? So they're trying within an organization to do BC, to try to infiltrate higher level employees, right? To get to the senior executives and then steal information off of them. We've had, for example, an organization, I'll keep them unnamed, where basically the attackers infiltrated the network with ATO, and then they used they stole a bunch of passwords from the payroll team, and then they used those passwords to log into the payroll system and change all of the employees' bank account numbers. And then when payday came in, all the checks were about to be distributed.
Got routed.
All the checks got routed, right? So to the wrong places. So that's, I think that's really the new frontier, is where ATO is kind of how you get in, and then they do much more sophisticated things once they're inside, because like most email vendors won't even check internal emails, and they have no way to stop internal emails, and and Microsoft typically won't stop it, right? So it's kind of an open. Once you get into the door, everything is open to you.
Yeah.
So.
Usuf, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for taking the time to join me.
Thank you, Steve, as always.
If you'd like to stay up on BEC attacks, phishing, or any other types of ATO scams, schemes, or money laundering frauds, remember, keep an eye on us at CSOonline.com. I'm Steve Reagan, and this has been Salted Hash. I'll see you next week. Bye.